Sign the goddamn papers, or I swear to God I'll make sure you lose everything. The land, the cattle, that precious family legacy you won't shut up about. Sign it now." She was standing 10 feet from me in my own pasture, designer heels sinking into dirt that's been in my family since 1889, holding a Glock 43 inches her right hand like it was a business card she'd pulled from her wallet, not pointing it directly at me, not yet. Just holding it there, casual and comfortable, like she'd practiced this moment in front of a mirror. The morning sun caught the chrome barrel. My hands didn't shake, not because I was brave, because I'd been waiting for something like this ever since the first HOA notice showed up nailed to my fence with roofing spikes. "Rebecca," I said, keeping my voice level, "you pull that trigger, and this whole thing ends very differently than you planned. Then sign." She stepped closer. Lululemon leggings and a cream blazer that probably cost more than my truck payment, clipboard tucked under her left arm, that gun steady in her right. Sign the voluntary annexation agreement. Transfer your property rights to Riverbend Estates HOA. We'll take care of everything. Maintenance, improvements, modernization. You'll finally join the 21st century instead of rotting out here like some stubborn relic. I looked at the papers she'd laid out on the tailgate of my pickup. Legal-sized, professionally formatted, notarized stamps, already in place. All I had to do was sign my name and 420 acres of Virginia farmland, my great-grandfather's land, my grandfather's land, my father's land. My land would become property of a homeowners association run by a woman who'd hated me since before she could spell her own name. And if I don't? Her smile was all teeth and no warmth. Then I file complaints with every county agency that exists. Environmental violations, zoning violations, safety violations. I'll bury you in inspections and fines until you can't afford to keep the lights on, and when the liens pile up and the foreclosure notice arrives, I'll be first in line at the auction. Either way, this land becomes mine. You just get to choose whether you walk away with something or nothing. That's when I noticed the camera. The one I'd installed 3 weeks ago in the oak tree overlooking the east barn. Solar-powered, motion-activated, live streaming to a cloud server that couldn't be erased even if she found it. I was recording every word, every threat, every second she held that gun, so I smiled back at her, and I picked up the pen. 6 months ago, if you'd told me I'd be facing down an armed HOA president in criminal court, I would have laughed and offered you a bourbon on my porch while we watched the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Back then, my biggest problem was deciding whether to replant the south field with hay or let it go fallow for a season, whether to fix the barn roof before winter or wait until spring when lumber prices might drop. I'm Thomas Sullivan, 63 years old, fourth-generation farmer in Albemarle County, Virginia, about 40 miles west of Charlottesville. I've worked this land my entire life before that. My father did, and before him, his father, going back to 1889 when my great-grandfather bought 420 acres of rolling hills and creek bottom for $600 and a handshake. The main house is old but solid, built in 1923 with local stone and cypress wood that'll outlast us all. Big wraparound porch, hand-hewn beams, a foundation you could park a semi on. I live here alone now. Been that way for 30 years, ever since my wife left, took the furniture, the savings account, and whatever dreams we hadn't already buried in separate bedrooms. I never remarried. Got used to the quiet, the rhythm of seasons, the company of cattle, and the occasional neighbor who understood that fences mean something. The eastern edge of my property runs flat up against a newer development called Riverbend Estates. Used to be wild forest and meadow over there, deer trails, turkey nests, the kind of land you don't improve because it's already perfect. Then a development company bought it in 2019 and built 200 identical houses arranged in cul-de-sacs with names like Harmony Court and Serenity Lane. Every house the same 3-floor. Plans. Every yard the same 3 trees. Every mailbox regulation black. With the houses came the one thing I'd hoped never to see that close to my fence line, a homeowners association. At first, it was just noise, occasional letters in my mailbox suggesting I might want to coordinate my property management with theirs, invitations to community meetings I never attended, polite inquiries about whether I'd consider selling my underutilized acreage for community expansion. I ignored all of it, tossed the letters in the wood stove, deleted the emails, went about my business. Then Rebecca Hartwell showed up at my door. I remember the exact moment I saw her walking up my driveway for the first time. It was a Wednesday morning in March 2024. I was repairing a section of fence near the barn when I heard tires on gravel, not the sound of a work truck, but the whisper of expensive rubber on German engineering. A black Audi SUV pulled up to my house and parked like it owned the place. The door opened, and out stepped a woman who radiated the kind of energy that makes you check your pockets to make sure your wallet's still there. 35 years old. Blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Pearl earrings. Cream-colored blazer over designer athletic wear. Heels that had no business on a farm. And a leather portfolio clutched like it contained nuclear launch codes. I recognized her immediately. Rebecca Hartwell. My ex-wife's daughter from her second marriage, born 2 years after our divorce. Not my blood, not my responsibility. But I'd seen her once at a distance when she was a kid, 10 years old, glaring at me across a grocery store parking lot like I'd personally ruined her life. Now she was 35 and walking toward me with that same glare, just better hidden behind professional courtesy. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, squinting against the sun like it offended her personally. "I'm Rebecca Hartwell, president of the Riverbend Estates Homeowners Association. I'd like to discuss integrating your property into our community framework." I leaned against the fence post, hammer still in hand. "Integrating?" Her smile looked like it hurt. "Yes, we're forming a broader cooperative to ensure consistent standards and mutual benefit for all property owners in the area. Your land is the only holdout." "Holdout from what?" "From progress, Mr. Sullivan. From community. From the 21st century." She pulled a document from her portfolio. "We're offering very generous terms, shared resources, legal support, infrastructure improvements. All you have to do is join." I spat into the dirt, not at her, but close enough to make a point. "This land's been in my family since 1889. I was raising cattle on that east field before your mother was born. I don't need legal support, and I sure as hell don't need permission to fix my own fence." Her expression didn't change. She'd rehearsed this. "I understand your attachment, but you'd be surprised how beneficial our structure can be. Community improvement funds, collective purchasing power, professional management. I've got my own tractor, my own tools, and my own lawyer," I interrupted. "We're done here." She stood there for a moment, calculating something behind those cold eyes. Then she gave me a tight nod, turned on her expensive heels, and walked back to her Audi. But before she drove away, she rolled down the window and called out, "My mother told me you were stubborn. She said you valued land more than people." I can see she was right. Then she left, tires spitting gravel like punctuation. I should have known that wasn't the end. Should have recognized the threat in her parting words. But I'd dealt with pushy developers before. You say no, they leave, life goes on. What I didn't know was that Rebecca Hartwell didn't accept no, and she'd been planning this for a long time. The harassment started small, subtle, easy to dismiss as coincidence. First came the letters, not polite invitations anymore. Official-looking notices on Riverbend Estates, HOA letterhead claiming my property was in violation of county ordinances I'd never heard of. Unregulated water drainage observed on property adjacent to Riverbend Estates. Please respond within 5 business days to avoid citation. I'd had that drainage ditch since before Rebecca was born. Part of the original irrigation system my grandfather built in the 1940s. Perfectly legal. Grandfathered under every zoning law in the county. I threw the notice in the trash, then came the inspectors. Two men in reflective vests showing up uninvited with clipboards and a drone, claiming they were contracted by the HOA to assess environmental compliance on adjacent properties. "This is private property," I told them, standing at the end of my driveway with my truck blocking their access. "You're trespassing." The taller one clipboard guy flashed a laminated card that looked official if you squinted. "We're authorized under county code to inspect potential hazards. You're authorized to get the hell off my land before I call Sheriff Morrison. You know him? Played football together in high school, still benches 300 pounds, and doesn't like people who lie about having authority they don't have." They left. The drone took one last sweep over my barn before disappearing toward Riverbend. That night, I installed security cameras, 6 of them, covering every approach to my property, every gate, every building. If Rebecca wanted to play games, I'd make sure I had evidence. But the real escalation came from an unexpected direction. His name was Derek Foster. Mid-30s, friendly smile, moved into Riverbend about 6 months after the development opened. Drove a beat-up Ford F-150, wore Carhartt work pants, had a toddler in a car seat, and dirt under his fingernails. The kind of guy who looked like he actually worked for a living instead of just playing farmer on weekends. We met at the feed store in town. Started talking about cattle prices, hay quality, whether the drought would break before summer. He mentioned he was thinking about getting a few goats, asked about fencing and predator control. Seemed genuine, seemed normal. So when he showed up at my place a few days later asking if I could help him repair a section of fence that bordered my property, I said sure. We spent an afternoon stringing wire and sinking posts. He brought beer. We talked about everything: weather, politics, the sorry state of modern country music. He became a semi-regular presence, would stop by once or twice a week, help with whatever project I was working on, bring his kid sometimes. The boy would chase my barn cats while Derek and I worked. I didn't think much of it. I'd been living alone long enough that having someone to talk to felt good, even if he did live in Riverbend's cookie-cutter suburb. Then one afternoon, we were replacing boards on the old hay barn when Derek made a mistake. I was telling him about the time my grandfather used dynamite to clear a beaver dam that was flooding the south pasture, one of his less OSHA-approved solutions, when Derek laughed and said, "Bet Rebecca lost her mind when she heard about that. I stopped mid-swing with the hammer. I never mentioned her name." There was a pause, just a heartbeat, but long enough. "Oh," Derek said casually, "I just assumed. She's the only HOA person anyone ever talks about around here." I nodded like it made sense, but inside, alarm bells were screaming. That night, I reviewed every security camera recording from the past 3 weeks. Derek's truck had been on my property more often than I'd realized, and in one clip, he was standing near the equipment shed holding something small and shiny, not a phone, maybe a voice recorder. So I changed tactics. Instead of confronting him, I fed him information. Carefully crafted misinformation. I mentioned I'd found some old documents suggesting other landowners were quietly joining the HOA, hinted I was reconsidering my position, even left a folder in my barn full of fake paperwork, aged with tea and coffee stains, stamped with meaningless notary marks. 2 days later, Derek's truck pulled up while I was out. The security camera caught him entering the barn, photographing the fake documents, and leaving with the entire folder tucked under his arm. Got him. The next day, his house in Riverbend had a "for sale" sign out front. Derek was gone. No goodbye. No explanation. And Rebecca's Audi was parked outside the HOA office for 6 hours straight. She thought she had me figured out. Thought I was too old, too isolated, too stubborn to see her game. What she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for people like her since the day they broke ground on Riverbend, and I'd just baited the trap. The harassment intensified after Derek disappeared. Weekly notices about violations that didn't exist, complaints to the county about offensive agricultural odors, my cattle, which had been there for generations. Anonymous reports to environmental agencies about unregulated livestock waste. Also, my cattle, also perfectly legal. Neighbors I'd known for 40 years suddenly stopped waving when I drove past. The elderly couple who ran the farm stand down the road turned their truck around when they saw me at the feed store, like they couldn't risk being seen talking to me. Someone left a dead snake coiled in my mailbox. Through it all, I kept the cameras running, documented everything, every notice, every visit, every threat, and I waited, because I knew Rebecca wasn't done. She'd gone to too much trouble, the spy, the fake violations, the coordinated harassment campaign. This was personal for her, not just about the land, about something deeper. I just didn't know how deep until that Friday morning when she showed up with a gun. It was early, maybe 7 a.m. I was behind the east barn tightening hinges on a storage gate when I heard tires on dirt. Not gravel this time. She'd driven straight into my pasture through a gate I'd left unlocked while working. The black Audi pulled up and stopped with surgical precision about 15 feet from where I stood. Engine running, tinted windows. Then the driver's door opened. Rebecca Hartwell stepped out in full HOA president costume, cream-colored Lululemon leggings, designer blazer, pearl earrings, hair pulled back so tight it looked like a threat, and in her right hand, held low but visible, a Glock 43. She wasn't hiding it, wasn't pointing it, just holding it there like a prop she'd grown comfortable with. "Morning, Mr. Sullivan," she said, like we were meeting for coffee. "I brought something for you." My mouth went dry, but my hands stayed steady. I'd installed that camera in the oak tree 3 weeks ago. Solar powered, motion activated, audio and video, streaming to a cloud server she didn't know existed. I was recording everything. "What's the occasion?" I asked, setting down my wrench. She pulled a leather folder from under her arm and opened it with her free hand. Inside were documents printed, tabbed, notarized to hell and back. "Declaration of voluntary annexation," she said. "Sign it and your property becomes part of Riverbend Estates HOA. We handle all maintenance, improvements, legal matters. You get full voting rights and community benefits." And if I don't, that smile, cold as January. Then your life becomes very difficult, very quickly. Every drainage ditch becomes a violation. Every building becomes unpermitted. Every fence becomes non-compliant. I'll file complaints with the county every single week. Environmental issues, zoning issues, safety issues. You'll drown in paperwork and fines. Eventually you'll get a lien. Then, foreclosure. Then, I buy this land at auction for pennies on the dollar. She stepped closer. The gun dipped slightly, but didn't waver. "Sign now and walk away with dignity, or fight me and lose everything. Your choice." I took the folder, flipped through the pages. All that corporate language designed to look legitimate, while stealing everything. One clause caught my eye: retroactive compliance required within 60 days of execution. I looked up at her. She was still holding the gun, confident, in control. Certain she'd won. "Can I run this past my lawyer first?" "No. Sign now, Thomas, or I start making calls the moment I leave." So, I signed. Not my name, not exactly. I used the name Thomas James Sullivan Sr., my father's name, a man who died 9 years ago, but whose name still appeared on old property documents in the county archive. The handwriting was perfect. My father had taught me to forge his signature decades ago as a family insurance policy against scam artists and fraudulent foreclosures. We used to joke about it. I never thought I'd actually need it. I handed her the papers. She didn't even check the signature, just stuffed them back in the folder like a wolf pocketing stolen prey. "You made the right choice," she said. "Things are going to be different around here now." Then she holstered the gun, shoulder holster, under her blazer. Professional got in her Audi and drove away. I stood there for a full minute, letting the adrenaline drain. Then I walked to the oak tree, climbed the ladder I'd hidden behind the barn, retrieved the camera, and went inside. Plugged it into my computer, pressed play. Her voice came through crystal clear. "Sign now, Thomas, or I start making calls the moment I leave." Every word, every threat, every second, that gun was visible. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Rebecca Hartwell had just recorded her own confession, and I had 3 backup copies uploading to servers she'd never find. I didn't wait. The moment that video finished uploading, I got to work. 3 flash drives, labeled with black Sharpie. Evidence, do not erase. 1 went into my fireproof safe. 1 went straight to Sheriff Morrison. The 3rd I overnighted to a lawyer I'd worked with years ago, a bulldog named Patricia Chen, who specialized in property rights and had a personal hatred of bureaucratic overreach. I also sent a Dropbox link to the county clerk's office with a note. For when she tries to file fraudulent documents. Sheriff Morrison watched the video in his office with the blinds closed. When it ended, he looked at me and said, "Tom, that woman just committed at least 3 felonies on camera. Armed extortion, attempted fraud." Probably others, once we dig into those fake violations. How fast can you move? I'll have a warrant by end of day. But Rebecca moved faster. Less than 18 hours after she drove off my property, she walked into the county land office with that leather folder tucked under her arm, ready to file what she clearly thought was a done deal. I heard the story from the clerk, a woman who goes to my church and whose husband I helped pull out of a ditch last winter. Apparently, Rebecca even brought champagne. Said something about finally bringing Sullivan's stubborn ass into the modern age. But when the clerk scanned the documents, the system flagged an immediate problem. The signature was from Thomas James Sullivan Sr., a man who'd been dead for 9 years. Public record, death certificate on file. The clerk asked Rebecca to clarify. Rebecca apparently said, "I must have been confused and signed my father's name by mistake." That's when the clerk pulled up the Dropbox link I'd sent and watched a woman holding a gun while demanding I sign documents under threat of financial ruin. Rebecca was still at the counter when Sheriff Morrison walked in and asked her to come with him to clear up some inconsistencies. She tried to talk her way out, claimed I was senile, that she was just helping me modernize, that the gun was for self-defense because I'd threatened her. Then Morrison showed her the video. She stopped talking. Asked for a lawyer. Got arrested anyway. The story exploded locally within 24 hours. HOA president arrested for armed extortion ran on the front page of the Charlottesville Daily Progress. Then regional news picked it up. Then CNN. My farm became a symbol, the small landowner fighting corporate tyranny, David versus Goliath, freedom versus HOA fascism. But the real devastation came when law enforcement dug deeper. With Rebecca in custody and unable to interfere, the county got a warrant and searched the Riverbend HOA office. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Boxes of pre-signed annexation forms. USB drives with recordings of Rebecca on phone calls bragging about her strategies to intimidate old farmers before they die and leave land to someone with Wi-Fi. She'd called me that stubborn relic who ruined my mother's life. But the smoking gun was her personal journal, page after page of targets, strategies, vendettas. One entry stood out. Thomas Sullivan thinks he's untouchable because his family has been here forever. He thinks land matters more than people. I'll take both the land and his legacy. He deserves to suffer for what he did to my mother. So, it wasn't just about the HOA. It was revenge. She blamed me for her mother's failed marriage, for leaving, for choosing land over family. Never mind that the marriage was already dead when I left. Never mind that I'd tried to make it work for years. Never mind that her mother had been the one who filed for divorce. In Rebecca's mind, I was the villain. And she'd spent years planning my destruction. The criminal trial was almost anticlimactic. The evidence was overwhelming. Video, audio, documents, witnesses. Rebecca's defense tried to argue I'd been uncooperative and she'd simply been trying to facilitate community integration, that the gun was for self-defense, that her threats were taken out of context. Then the prosecution played the full video. Rebecca's voice calm and clear. "Sign now, or I'll bury you in fines until you lose everything." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Asterisk. Armed extortion times. Attempted fraud through forgery times. Conspiracy to defraud times. Criminal impersonation of authority. Sentencing. 10 years federal prison. No parole eligibility for at least 6. The courtroom didn't cheer, just exhaled collectively, like releasing pressure that had been building for months. But something happened during sentencing that I'll never forget. Rebecca stood up before the judge could finish and screamed, "He destroyed my mother! He left her broken and alone and kept this precious land like it was more important than people! He deserves to lose everything!" I wanted him to finally pay for what he did. The judge ordered her removed. Bailiffs had to physically escort her out while she shouted about justice and revenge and how I was the real criminal. I sat there watching, feeling nothing but a hollow kind of sadness. Not for me, for her. For the decades she'd spent nurturing hatred over something that had nothing to do with her. The fallout was swift and brutal. Riverbend Estates HOA dissolved within 2 weeks. Board members resigned en masse. Some claimed they'd had no idea what Rebecca was doing. Others took plea deals. A state task force was formed to investigate HOA abuse across Virginia. They called it the Sullivan Review Initiative. I didn't ask for that, but apparently someone thought it had a nice ring to it. I started getting visitors. Other landowners fighting their own HOA battles, law students researching property rights, reporters wanting the inside story. I set up folding chairs in my barn and started holding informal workshops, teaching people how to read their deeds, where to find legal help, how to document harassment. Someone printed t-shirts that said, "Not on my land," with a picture of a fence. I didn't wear one, but I bought a dozen for people who did. My lawyer, Patricia, helped me draft a booklet, A Farmer's Guide to Fighting HOA Overreach. We distributed it free online, downloaded over 50,000 times in the first month. I didn't ask to become a folk hero, never wanted to be a symbol, but when you stand up to a bully and win, people notice, they hope, they find courage. And sometimes that's worth more than keeping your head down. Epilogue 1 year later. It's March 2025. Exactly 1 year since Rebecca Hartwell first showed up at my door with her clipboard and her demands. I'm sitting on my porch with coffee and my dog Duke, watching the sun rise over the Blue Ridge Mountains, thinking about how much has changed. My farm is still here, still mine, still free from HOA jurisdiction, and always will be. Rebecca is in federal prison, working kitchen duty, scheduled for parole review in 2030. I haven't heard from her. Don't expect to. Riverbend Estates is quieter now. New management company, reasonable rules, no harassment campaigns. Several former residents have apologized to me. The lemon tree I planted after burning Rebecca's hate letter is thriving. Bitter fruit, but healthy. And yesterday, something happened that made all of this worthwhile. A young couple knocked on my door, newlyweds who'd just bought a house in Riverbend. They wanted to thank me. "We almost didn't move here because of the HOA horror stories," the wife said. "But then we heard what you did, how you fought back. It gave us hope that maybe communities could be different." I offered them coffee. We talked for an hour about farming, property rights, and the importance of knowing when to stand your ground. As they left, the husband turned back and said, "My grandfather had a farm. Lost it to eminent domain in the 80 seconds. Never recovered. What you did, protecting your land, that matters. Not just for you. For all of us." I stood on my porch watching them drive away, Duke at my feet, coffee going cold in my hand. Some people think land is just dirt and dollars. They're wrong. Land is legacy. It's memory. It's the line you draw and say, "This far, no further." I drew that line. I held it, and I'd do it again. Because some things are worth fighting for. And freedom, real freedom, isn't given. It's defended, one signature at a time. The end.